Okay, so we talked about case one when you're dealing with discrete datums and a small sample size. We're going to kind of leapfrog over case two and go to case three, which is kind of like maybe the more advanced case. Case two uses a mixture of both one and three. All right, so I want to go to case three and kind of talk about um, how to calculate maybe I guess just calculate continuous datums with either small or large sample sizes. All right, so here we are with case three, um, looking at continuous type datums. So remember, continuous datums are datums that will have decimal places of accuracy. These are most likely measured values. And we're looking at the case where we don't have access to the raw data at all. We're really going to be dealing with a frequency distribution table and or just a histogram. And we're talking about small or large sample sizes. Um, so in contrast to case one, the data is continuous, meaning the datums have decimal places of accuracy, and sometimes the sample size can be large. Um, so because the data is continuous, meaning again, it's measured and has decimal places of accuracy, the mode is less direct because you might happen to have two numbers, two datums in the data set that are the same, but they may not be actually in the center of the range of data that you have. Um, so in order to get the mode from this kind of data, you first have to format the data into a frequency distribution table and or a histogram. And once you've done that, then you can calculate the arithmetic mode using an equation that I'm going to give you. So down below, what I've got is an example of a large data set of continuous type datums. So you can see each of these datums have decimal places. So 241.89, 244.11, 244.32. So altogether, we've got 150 of these. Okay, there's just a lot. Now, um, that's too much to even deal with a calculator, right? You can imagine you'd be pulling your hair out trying to type all these into a calculator. Um, if you were going to work with these in spreadsheet software, it'd be pretty easy, believe it or not. You would just kind of copy and paste these values in, or they would be in a comma separated value text file that you would then open or import into Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets. Um, but this data here um, is what the frequency distribution table, okay, the frequency distribution table or the histogram is based off of. Okay, so if you took this data that's up here and you made a frequency distribution table, we'd have this on the left. Or if we made a histogram of that data, it would look like this histogram here on the right. So what we're looking at here in case three is what if we only had access to either the table or the histogram? Just by looking at the table or the histogram, we can calculate the mean, which of the data, if we have the actual data, but we can approximate that mean by calculating the arithmetic mean using an equation. The median of the data set can be approximated by calculating the arithmetic median using an equation, and the mode can be approximated with the arithmetic mode equation. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of setting the scene for what case three is all about. So we're being given just the frequency distribution table or just the histogram. So let's look at an example where that's all we have. Okay. before I move on, kind of what I want to point out here, again, are these two links at the top. So whenever you see a mastery question and you see some links here, if you want to practice this example more, then if you're looking at the PDF of my lecture notes, then you can just click on it or right click and put open in a new tab. And what that'll look like, it'll look like something like this. Let's see here. This might not be shared. Let me add that so that you can see. Oh, I think you can already see what I'm looking at. Okay. What's that? Yeah, okay. So, if you want to practice this problem, it gives you a frequency distribution table and a histogram with the frequency values here. And this is practicing calculating the arithmetic mean by putting in these values and calculating the arithmetic mean right here. And, you click submit to check your answers as you go along. And if you want more practice, with this type of problem, you can put just try a similar question. And notice when I do that, all of these values will change. See? So all of these values change. It gives you a whole new data set to work from, and all of these will be different. So you can practice this, as much as you want until you feel like you've mastered this skill. Okay, so here in this example, we're going to calculate the arithmetic mean given just a frequency distribution table and or a histogram here. So in order to calculate the arithmetic mean, we're going to use this equation right here. All right, so the arithmetic mean is equal to the sum of, keeps moving my highlighted areas there. So this character that kind of looks like capital E, that's a capital Greek letter sigma, I believe. And what that means is that means the sum of. So over here on the side, this means this sigma f means the sum of all the frequencies. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking the sum of all of the products of the frequency times the midpoint. And we're going to divide that by the sum of all the frequencies. So this is going to be the equation we're using. It sounds rather complicated right now, but we're going to use the calculator to do most of the heavy lifting for us. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So because you're looking at a PDF of this, or you have a hard copy, and you've got a calculator in front of you, you can reference that, okay? So let's look what we need in order to calculate the mean of this data set, given just the picture we're looking at. So we have some things that we need. Need number one, for each class, we need the midpoints for each class. So the midpoint between the lower bound and the upper bound. So that's what MP stands for here, is the midpoint for each class. And so what we need is we've got a lower bound for the first class. We've got an upper bound for the first class. What's the midpoint between those two? Now, we know it's going to be 238. Okay, 238 is midway between 234 and 242, but we need that number in our calculator in order to do some multiplication that we need for this equation. Okay, so that number of 238 needs to be in our calculator. Need number two, for each class, we need the product of the frequency times the midpoint. So here we need the product of the frequency times the midpoint for each class. So there's 13 classes, so we're going to need 13 products here. And that would be a lot to do one at a time, but the calculator is going to do it all for you, and I'll show you how to do that. What we need is the sum of all the frequencies, okay, the sum of all the Fs. And again, the calculator is going to do that for you. and then need for the sum of all of the products of frequency times the midpoint. Again, the calculator is going to do that for you. So I'm going to show you how to use the calculator as a powerful tool in order to make your life a heck of a lot easier. All right. Now I'm going to switch over to calculator screens here. So I have kind of in the lecture notes here screenshots, from the calculator, but all of these screenshots are all the things that I'm going to be doing now in the video for both calculators. All right. So let's go ahead and switch over we'll do the Texas Instruments calculator first. So I'm going to come here. And again, what you want to do is no matter what screen you're in, we want to go to the list editor. So to get to the list editor, you want to hit the Stat button. And then under the Edit menu, we want this first option, which is 1:edit. So hit Enter. Now, in the interests of time, I've gone ahead and entered in some of the data already. So list 1 are all of the values from the lower bound for each class. So notice I've got 234, 242, 250, and so on. If I flip back over to the lecture notes, we have 234, 242, 250, and so on. So I entered all of these values in, okay? So I put all of those values in to list 1. So list 1 represents the lower bound for each class. And I went ahead and I put the frequencies in list 3. Okay, so the frequencies were 2, 5, 5, 14, and so on. I'll come back over to the lecture notes. And I've got 2, 5, 5, 14, and so on, all the way down. So I put those values in. Okay. But what we need is we need to calculate midpoints. And to calculate midpoints, we need the lower bound and we need the upper bound. Now, I could have typed in all of the upper bound values into list 2. Okay, let me show you what I'm talking about. So these upper bound values, I could have typed all those in. But let me show you how to use the calculator to get these values for you. So notice that that the width of each class, we can get that from either the histogram or we can get it from our table. And so, what's the width? What's the distance between the lower bound and the upper bound? Well, I think probably the easiest way to see that would be to look at these last two numbers. So what's the difference between 330 and 338? That's 8. So we're dealing with a width of 8 between the lower bound and the upper bound. If we come up here to the histogram, we could look at maybe these two midpoints. What's the difference between those two? 310 and 318? That's a difference of 8. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to take the lower bound numbers and just add 8 to them. So let's do that in the calculator. So to do that in the calculator, what we need to do is we need to take the cell that's selected, and we want to select the list 2 heading. Okay, not the row below it, but we want to select list 2. And you'll notice here that it says just list 2 equals down here at the bottom of the calculator screen. And what we want to do is we want to tell the calculator that list 2 is going to be list 1 plus 8. Okay, so I probably did that really fast. So let me show you again. We want to have list 2 be equal to whatever's in list 1 plus 8 plus our width. So to put in L1, we need to hit the blue second button, followed by the number 1 key. And you can see that puts in an L1 here. And then we want to put plus 8. And now as soon as you hit enter, it does all of that addition for you. Really nice and easy. All right. So now we've got our lower bound. Now we have our upper bounds. Let's skip over to list 4. And list 4, this is going to be our list of midpoints. And so what's a midpoint? A midpoint is the average of these two numbers. So to do an average, we need to add these two and divide by 2. So I'm going to put in a left parentheses. So notice, again, I have list 4 selected here at the top. Many students make the mistake of having the currently selected cell, this one down below. It'll give you an error if you try and do this. So make sure that the heading of the column, list 4, is selected. Okay, so let's put in left parentheses. And then we want to take the value in list 1, add to that the value in list 2, right parentheses, and then divide that by 2. And then when we hit enter, it's going to give us a list of midpoints. All right, so let me go back to our problem here. And what were some of the things we needed? Well, we needed the list of midpoints, which we've got. The second need is the product of the frequency times the midpoint. So let's go back to the calculator. And so that's going to be here in list 5. So list 5 is going to be the product of our frequencies, which is in list 3, times the midpoint, which is in list 4. So list 5 is going to be list 3 times list 4. Enter. So you can see if you were to do this one by one by hand, it would take you forever. Calculator used as a tool can calculate these numbers really fast for you if you know how to use it. All right, so let's flip back over to what we need. So now we need the sum of all the frequencies, and we need the sum of all the products. So the frequencies were in L3, and the products we just calculated were in L5. So let's go back over to the calculator. And now we're going to use another function similar to one that we've used already. So leaving this data here, let's go to the Stat button, click it. Now we want to go to the Calc menu. But instead of doing one variable stats, we're going to do 2 variable stats. Because now we got 2 variables. We have the frequency variable, and we have the product of the frequencies and midpoints as a second variable. So we're going to hit enter. And our first variable, our list of values, frequency values, that was in list 3. So I need to put second 3 to put list 3 in. The list of frequency times midpoints, that was in list 5. And we're not going to have a frequency list. So yours might be blank. Mine has something left over from previous calculation I did. So I'm going to hit clear. And then I need to hit calculate. So now this is giving me all of the statistics for the frequency list, which was list 3. And then these ones that say Y. These are the statistics for the frequency times midpoint column. And what we need is we need this one, which is the sum of all the frequencies, which was 150, and the sum of all of the frequency midpoint products, which was 42,068. So this value ended up being 150, and this ended up being 42,068. Am I remembering that correctly? 42,068. That's right. And so when we come down here, let me just go ahead and scroll to the end, and we're calculating the arithmetic mean. It's the sum of the frequency times midpoint products, which was 42,068, all over the sum of the frequencies, which was 150. And 42,068 divided by 150, this you do have to do in your calculator, should come out to 280.45. So that's how you would use the Texas Instruments calculator to calculate the arithmetic mean if you were given just the frequency distribution table and the histogram. So now let's look at this using the NUMWORKS calculator. All right. So let me come here. So we need all the same things from the NUMWORKS calculator, but we're going to do it in a slightly different order. Let me come over here. So with the NUMWORKS calculator, again, I've entered in all of the lower bounds into this variable x1. Oh, but let me back up a step. If I go back to the home screen and there's all these apps, all right, which app am I in? So the app that I'm in is this one called Regression. So if you scroll over to the Regression app and click OK, that's where I'm at. And it tells you kind of really at the top of the screen what app you're in. And so I'm here in the Regression app. All right, so in X1, this is where I've put the lower bounds. So we've got 234, 242, 250. And if I come back over here to my problem, you can see the lower bound is 234, 242, and 250. Okay. And see if I right arrow over, I put the frequencies over here on this column, X3. I went ahead and typed in all of my frequencies here. So 2, 5, 5, 14, and so on. I come back over. Here's my list of frequencies, 2, 5, 5, 14, and so on. Now, the reason why I've set it up this way, I think will become apparent as we continue. But I'll wait until the end, and you'll kind of see the method to my madness. All right, so the first thing we need to do is we need to have our list of upper bounds here. So we could type in all the upper bounds ourselves, but I'm going to show you how you can program your calculator to do it for you. So let's look at our list of lower bounds and upper bounds, and notice that the difference between the lower bound and the upper bound is going to be 8. So for example, since the lower bound down here is 330, what's the upper bound for the 13th class? It's 338. That is a difference of 8. That is our class width. And then if we come over here to, for example, 310 and 318, what's the difference between those two midpoints? That's 8. So what we need to do is we need to take this list of lower bound numbers and add 8 to them. And that'll give us this list of upper bound numbers. Okay, so let's do that with the NUMWORKS calculator. So what you want to do is come over here to Y1 and hit OK. And what we want to do is we want to fill this with a formula. So scroll down to fill with a formula, and click OK. And go ahead and go with empty. So down here at the bottom, it says y1 equals. Well, we want y1 to equal x1 plus 8. So how do we type in x1? Well, notice that with the NUMWORKS calculator, it has letters of the alphabet at the top right corner of each key. And so the letter X is here above the number 2 key right here. So to print that X, notice that the X is in black or gray. We need this alpha button to do it. Okay, so let's see here. We need to put Shift alpha and then 2. And that puts a capital X. And then we're going to put a 1. So that's how I type in x1 to reference this column. And now we want to take this column and add 8. And as soon as we hit execute, there's all of the upper bound values, 242, 250, 258, right? 250 plus 8 is 258. So that gives us all of our upper bound values. Now, the reason why we did that, let me see here. Okay, the reason why we did that is because now we need to calculate the midpoints. Now the midpoints we're going to calculate over here in this column, and this is going to be the x2 column. So again, we want to program that, and we want to program it to give us the average of these two numbers. So to average any two numbers, you just add them and divide by 2. So again, move your cursor so that x2 is selected, and click OK. Put fill with a formula and empty. All right, so now it says x2 is equals. So this is where we're going to put in our averaging formula. So we want to do x, so we want to put parentheses first, and then shift alpha x1 plus shift alpha 3 to put in a y, 1, right parentheses, divide by 2. Because we put the parentheses in there because we want to make sure that these two numbers get added first, and then dividing by 2 happens last. So now if I hit execute, it should fill x2 up with all the midpoints, just like that. So probably the easiest one to look at is, what's the midpoint between 250 and 258? Well, that would be 254. So there's 254. Okay, so x2 is our list of midpoints. Now let's come over to x3 and y3. So this last column, we're going to have as a product of our frequencies and our midpoints. So this column y4 is going to be x2 times x3. So this column here, I'm going to click OK, fill with a formula, OK, make it empty. And so this is going to be equal to x2 times x3. So shift alpha x2 times shift alpha x3. And now when I hit execute, this gives me the product of each frequency times the midpoint for that class. Frequency times midpoint. So 246 times 5 is 1,230. A frequency of 5 times 254 is 1,270. Okay. Now let me show you why I put frequency and the products of frequency and midpoint here under X3 and Y3. Because when we're calculating our mean, we need the sum of the product of frequency and midpoint and the sum of the frequencies. It keeps shifting things around. Okay. What we need is the sum of the frequency times the midpoint and the sum of the frequencies. Really struggling against this here. So this is X3 and this one is Y3. So we need those two sums. So let's go back to the calculator. And if we go up and we switch from the data tab over to the stats tab and tap OK, now we can scroll to the right. And we want to scroll all the way over until we get to X3 and Y3. And this second row here, which has sum of the x's, so the sum of all of the frequencies was 150, and the sum of all of the frequency midpoint products is 42,068. So this is the reason why I put the frequencies way out here in this X3 column, is because at the end I wanted to hit stats and get the sum and have those two side by side so they'd be easy to read. So we take this sum of the frequencies of 150 and this the sum of the frequency midpoint products, 42,068. Come back over and plug it into this equation. So let me scroll down. And so here, the arithmetic mean is the sum of the frequency times the midpoint products, which was 42,068, all over the sum of the frequencies, which was 150. And so this you have to do, like in the basic calculator function. So if I switch back over to here, if I want to just calculate those two, I can write them down, click over to home, go up to just the calculation app, and then I can put 42,000, 68 divided by 150. And you can see it gives me 280.45. 280.45. Yeah. Okay, so that is how you can calculate the arithmetic mean given a frequency distribution table, or a histogram with the frequencies and the midpoints here. Sometimes histograms aren't delineated by midpoints like this. Sometimes they give lower and upper bounds for each one. But regardless, you should be able to cope with that using, this formula here. And I've shown you a really powerful way at how you can use your calculator to make this kind of calculation relatively painless to do. Okay, and once again, remember, there are these links to these questions. If you want more practice, you can just click on them. And it'll bring up a MyOpenMath problem that I've made. And you can put in your answers. You can check your answers by clicking Submit. And if you want another one to practice with, just put try similar question, and it'll redo the numbers, and these answers will change. All right? So keep practicing until you can master it. Let me know if you have any questions.